Alright, 6th graders, we're going to try something new today, and you'll need to make sure that you're paying close attention to this video and to everything that I'm saying, because this is a pretty important lesson for this school year. We're going to start with a bell ringer that looks a little bit different. Below you see 3 questions that all have to do with our map skills that we have been learning. I'm going to give your teams 1 minute to discuss what you think the answers are to these 3 questions. Be sure to save time to get to all 3 questions. Alright, now that you've had time to discuss with your teams, let's talk about the answer to number 1. We talked about the equator and the prime meridian yesterday, and we learned that anything above the equator is always labeled with degrees north. For example, 20 degrees north or 40 degrees north would be north of the equator. The opposite of that is south of the equator. Anything below the equator is always labeled degrees south. 20 degrees south, 40 degrees south, 60 degrees south, they're all below the equator. Degrees east and degrees west work the same way but for the prime meridian. Anything east of the prime meridian is labeled degrees east, and anything west of the prime meridian is labeled degrees west. So if we're looking for the coordinates of Olathe in the United States, it is north of the equator and west of the prime meridian. That means our answer has to be A, 39 degrees north and 93 degrees west. Think of the equator and the prime meridian dividing the globe kind of like the 4 quadrants of a coordinate graph in math. Answer number 2. Which makes more sense for the definition of degrees in latitude and longitude? You've heard me say degrees several times. 20 degrees north, 30 degrees east. These degrees are not measuring temperature. The equator being 0 degrees does not mean that it's 0 degrees on the equator. Instead, degrees is a measure of distance. Think of it like inches or feet or miles. 60 degrees north means that it is 60 degrees away from the equator. It's a measure of distance. And that brings us to question number 3. Why are intermediate directions listed like this? Northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast. Why aren't they listed west-north or east-south? The way I remember that the N for north and the S for south always come first is because of the north and south poles. They're so important in our globe that when we describe a compass rose, we even list them first. We always say north, south, east, and west. So just remember when you're labeling, the N and the S, north and south, always come first. Take a look at the map terms handout that you have in front of you. Several of these map terms will look really familiar because we've talked about many of them in the last couple of days. There are a few new ones too, though. We're going to use these map terms to practice some academic reading. Mrs. Dahl has taught you that all reading serves a purpose, and when you are reading for academic reasons, you're reading to try to pull out the most important information. Today, I want you to do this by highlighting what you think is most important. Remember, you need to be selective. If you're realizing that you are highlighting almost everything in each description, you need to highlight less and look for what you truly think is the very most important thing. If you finish early, go back and rewrite what you highlighted in your own words in pencil. Your time starts now. Remember to work on your own. Now that you've found what's most important for each map term, I want to talk a little bit in detail about landform and landscape. These 2 terms are really easy to confuse. The way that I remember it is a landform has an actual form or shape to it. Picture a mountain, a river, a lake. These items have shapes. That's how I remember form. landform. Landscape is more like what's scattered around an area. Think of scape and scattered. It is sandy or rocky or hilly. It's scattered all over. It's what type of land there is. If we used our classroom as an example, our carpet would be the landscape and each desk would be a landform. Take a minute to write a hint to yourself that you can use to remember the difference between landform and landscape. If you want to use scattered or shapes to help you remember, you can write that hint down. Or if you want to use the carpet and the desks analogy, you can write that down too. Alright, take a look at the side of your Kansas map that lists the requirements. It looks a little overwhelming because there's a lot of information, but I'm going to help break it down for you. You'll need to make sure you're paying close attention because these requirements will be the same as all of the requirements on your maps throughout the entire school year. It says you will be developing a map to reveal your knowledge and understanding of two important things. Number one, your understanding of a few basic geographic terms like title, symbol, cardinal and intermediate directions, legend, latitude and longitude, etc. These are the map terms that we just looked at. Most of them are defined on that page for you. Number two says that you're going to need to show your knowledge of the location, climate, landscape, and resources of the region shown on the map. All of the information that you'll need for location, climate, landscape, and resources will be information that we learn in class together. As a matter of fact, you can see a lot of those categories are listed on the note sheet that's already on your desk. The next thing you need to know about completing maps and social studies is what resources you'll need to use in order to do this. I want you to highlight or underline where it says please use the information below, your textbook, and our class discussions, including the models shown in class, to guide your progress. Anytime you work on a map in social studies, you'll need at least 3 things in front of you. You'll want the checklist below, you'll want your textbook, and you'll want our notes from class. It also says that you can use the models shown in class. That would be this Kansas map. What we complete together today is the example for all of the maps that you'll complete all year long. Let's take a closer look at the checklist. The first few items are items that can be found on maps in your textbook, like title, or cardinal and intermediate directions on a compass rose, or even latitude and longitude, which a lot of times can be found in the atlas. But starting with number 4, you'll see that most of the rest of the checklist matches up exactly with the notes at your table. Number 4 asks you to use a label to show the name of the region or civilization. On the notes at your table, this is the state, Kansas. Number 5 asks you to show any important cities. That's also listed on the notes. Numbers 6 and 7 are landforms and bodies of water. Look at that half sheet. They're listed there too. Numbers 8, 9, and 10, landscape, resources, and climate, are also listed on the notes that I've given you. As you can see, the notes that we take in class together are going to be a huge help on our maps this year. Let's look at numbers 11 and 12. These 2 items are in bold because you should be paying close attention to them from the very first minute that you start your map. Number 11 says demonstrates attention to quality and craftsmanship in product. This is basically your neatness and effort. Professional map makers, called cartographers, work really hard to make sure everything they do on a map is neat and easy to read. This is why when we make our maps in social studies, we do all of our labeling in pencil and all of our coloring in colored pencil. Number 12 says that all writing is free of errors in spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar. If you were using a map to drive somewhere and noticed that many of the city's names were misspelled, you would probably start to lose faith in that map and not trust it because you would assume that the map maker didn't really know what they were doing. It's going to be very important for you to make sure all of your writing is spelled correctly and that all proper nouns are capitalized. Last, let's talk about the little boxes at the end of each line. They're not just here for decoration. Those boxes are there for you to use as a checklist. I've already written a couple of check marks in on the first two as an example. You should always check off each box as you complete that item. Make sure you don't check it off if you haven't completed the full item. But if you go back at the end and double check everything on that map and you can put a check mark in each box, it means that you've completed this map to the best of your ability. Use those boxes as your checklist and your double check. You'll notice that before each number there's a blank. These blanks are for us to use as we grade our maps, so don't write anything in them until it's time to grade. Alright, let's get started. Raise your hand if you can tell me the first thing on our checklist. Notice that it doesn't just say title, it says appropriate title. Remember, titles in 6th grade have two parts. The first part of the map title always tells us the location of the place. Where is this map? What are we studying? The second part of the title always tells us what type of map it is. Is it a population map, or a road map, or a climate map? Well, it's pretty easy to tell the place of this title. What is it? Kansas. The type of map is a little bit harder though. Most of the times you can tell what type of map you're looking at by looking at the legend. If you notice, there are dots in the legend representing the amount of people that live there. It's a population map. If you notice, the legend is showing you different types of weather. It's a climate map. If you notice that the legend is showing you skinny lines for roads and thick lines for highways, you're probably looking at a road map. In this case, we need to figure out what's going to be in our legend in order to figure out what type of map this is. You can see that numbers 8 and 9 on our checklist both use the word legend. It's even underlined to make it more obvious. Number 8 says that we're going to use appropriate color shading and the legend to show types of landscapes in the region. And number 9 says that we're going to use appropriate symbols and the legend to show important resources of the region. It looks to me like our legend is only going to include two things, the landscapes and the resources. That means that the type of map we're making is a landscape and resource map. Let's put that all together, the place and the type of map, and the title that we get is Kansas, Landscapes and Resources. Notice that I've separated the place, Kansas, from the type of map, a landscape and resource map, by using a colon. Alright, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? Based on what our task said, have I completed number 2? Is my compass rose complete? How about now? Does everything look okay? Remember, always, always capitalize every letter in your compass rose, even the second letter of the intermediate directions. Alright, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? I've gone ahead and labeled our line of longitude 100 degrees west and our line of latitude 40 degrees north. I've also drawn an X that you don't need to copy onto your map. This X marks buried treasure. All you have to do is tell me the coordinates and the treasure is yours. Can you do it? The reason no one is able to tell me where the buried treasure is because there's only one line of longitude and one line of latitude. We have absolutely no reference for what another line might be. The other line might be 10 or 20 or 1 or 4. We have to have 2 lines of longitude and 2 lines of latitude so we can make an estimated guess. Now that you can see the other line of longitude is 95 degrees west and the other line of latitude is 36 degrees north, we can make a better guess at where that buried treasure is located. Now what do you think the coordinates are? All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? For this task and for the rest of the tasks on our list today, we'll need to use the half sheet of notes at your table. Remember, for future maps, we'll be taking these notes together as a class, but today I've provided the notes for you. Instead of a region or civilization, our example map is a map of Kansas, so we have state listed as our first geography component. The state is obviously Kansas, so we'll need to make sure that we label Kansas nice and big right across the middle where map readers can see it easily. You'll always want to label the region or civilization so the map readers know exactly where that civilization is on the map. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? So task 5 tells us to use labels to show any of the important cities in the area. Obviously, there are way too many cities in Kansas for us to label them all. So this is where we look to your notes to figure out which cities are most important. If the city is listed in your notes, it's a city that I expect to see on your map. In this case, we have 3, Kansas City, Topeka, and Wichita. Remember, we always use the dot to mark the spot of a city. And make sure you are labeling only in pencil with capital letters where you need them. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? Labeling landforms is similar to labeling cities. We'll need to look in our notes to figure out which landforms we need to label, and if it's a river, we'll probably need to draw that river on the map before we do any labeling. Don't forget, there are many other rivers and landforms in Kansas, but we are only going to be looking at the ones listed in our notes. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? In case you haven't noticed, we're not exactly surrounded by water here in Kansas. Although there are some minor lakes, there's nothing really major that stands out as far as lakes or seas go, so we can check this one off with no bodies of water labeled on our map. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? Numbers 8 and 9 on the map are going to be the most difficult ones. Both of them require you to use a legend, so we'll need to start by drawing a legend. Number 8 tells us to use appropriate color shading, which means this is the first time you'll need your colored pencils. We'll be using colored pencils to show the types of landscapes in Kansas. Remember, the landscape is the type of land that's scattered around. Is it rocky? Is it hilly? Is it mountainous? That's what we'll be using to show landscape. Now that we have our legend drawn, we need to decide what type of landscapes we'll be showing in Kansas. Our notes tell us that the landscape in Kansas is fertile plains. The soil is perfect for growing crops, that's the fertile part, and we have a lot of plains in western Kansas. That means we have a lot of flat, open areas. This makes sense since we've already talked about how we export a lot of grain like wheat, barley, oats, and corn. Since fertile plains are the only type of landscape in Kansas, we get kind of an easy job on this map. We only need one colored pencil, and we're actually going to shade all of Kansas green because all of Kansas is going to be labeled as fertile plains. Once the shading is finished, we'll need to show in the legend what that green color means. So we'll need to write the word fertile plains and draw a small green box to show that the green on the map matches up with the fertile plains in the legend. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? On number 9, we once again see that we're going to need to use our legend. This time, we'll be using symbols to show the major resources in Kansas. Our notes show us that our main resource is wheat, so we only need to come up with one symbol to represent wheat. We'll put the wheat in western Kansas since that's where most of our wheat is grown, and then we'll also need to put that symbol and label wheat in our legend to help us figure out the code. Now that we have wheat on the map and wheat in the legend, we've shown our resources using symbols. The biggest mistake that 6th graders make on their maps is putting too much in the legend. Remember, number 8 and number 9 are the only 2 items that we're going to need in our legend, just the landscape and resources. That's why we put landscape and resources as part of our title. It's the type of map that we're looking at. So once you've put the landscape and resources in your legend, you're done. All right, turn your page over and check off that task. It is complete. Can I get a volunteer to read our next task? Number 10 on our list is probably one of the easiest steps in the whole map. We need to explain the climate below the map. That's what the lines below the map are for. Since the climate is already listed out for us in the notes, all we need to do is take the information and turn it into complete sentences with proper punctuation and capitalization. Now we need to look at numbers 11 and 12, the ones that we already talked about. Did we pay attention to our quality and craftsmanship? Did we label everything in pencil in our neatest handwriting? Did we color everything neatly in colored pencil? And have we put our best effort into the map? If so, we can check off number 11. For number 12, is all of our writing free of errors in spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar? That means proper nouns begin with capital letters. If so, we can also check this one off. Now it's time to see how we did. Let's go through each step, making sure that each task is complete and correct. If it is, you'll get to put a plus on the line next to the task. If for some reason it's incomplete or incorrect, you'll need to put a circle there.